Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the 3 things we fear the most. And I think we all have these 3 fears, though they manifest in completely different ways for different people. But I think the more that we can become conscious about these fears, the more we can do to address them, overcome them, face them, and dissolve them. It is often said that there are 2 opposing forces in the universe, love and fear. I say they're opposing because each dissolves, deconstructs, or can kind of push the other energy out and take over. And fear can absolutely corrode and destroy love, and love can absolutely dissolve and heal fear. Now, I said they're opposing forces. They're actually more interactive forces that are in constant interplay, interaction, and integration with each other. And we do live on the plane of duality here as earth beings. And duality are these kind of sets of opposites that work together to keep everything in motion. Now, there's a whole spiritual practice and philosophy called non-duality, which is about superseding these opposing forces and connecting with the oneness of all things. If you want to learn more about my perspective on non-duality, you can check out my podcast number 51, What the Fuck is Non-Duality? But we're going to be deep in the human dualistic experience with fear on the dark end. And from a more secular or scientific perspective, we could see those opposites as creation and destruction, order and organization versus chaos and entropy. And from a purely spiritual perspective, we could talk about higher power and lower power, 2 terms I find very helpful. Because we're always in motion and looking deeply at what powers us, what drives us, what's fueling our proverbial car of ourself through the world can be generally put in one of 2 baskets. Is it based on fear or is it based on love? Am I being self-centered or selfless? Am I motivated by protecting and defending myself, grabbing all that I can get? Worry that I won't have enough or that I'll lose what I already have? Or do I spend my time and energy focused on what I can bring, what I can create, and what I have to offer in any circumstance or situation in my life? Now, humans are complicated, and it's usually a very messy mix of both. And I have found journaling, good therapy, and prayer and meditation to be really valuable tools in sorting out that kind of inner chaos of love and fear. Now, I use the terms in the widest definition possible. So when I use the term love, I'm talking about compassion, personal growth, wisdom, courage, connection, positive, constructive action, thoughts, feelings, and behavior. All fall in the love bucket. And when I talk about fear, I mean procrastination, avoidance, anger, which is usually rooted in fear, blame, shame, guilt, anxiety, insecurity, worry. All the fun tools in the fear bucket. Each human is unique, and so these 3 main fears may fall in a different ranking order with different people or even at different times in your life. And the 3 things we fear the most are being alone, being harmed, or being unworthy or unloved. Did a 12-step workshop recently where 20 of us spent 6 months doing the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are one of the most powerful tools for transformation that I've come across. It remains a personal aspiration of mine to develop or participate in a system that makes the 12 steps available to everyone. In fact, I did a podcast titled 12 Steps for Everyone. It's number 61 if you want to learn more about the 12 steps. And step 4 is where you take a written personal inventory put down on paper all that stuff most of us don't really want to look at, and that includes a list of fears. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is kind of the basic text of most 12-step fellowships, it talks about how fear touches every aspect of our lives and is an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence is shot through with it. It sets in motion trains of circumstances which bring us misfortune we feel we don't deserve. But somehow we ourselves set the ball rolling. It goes on to say that perhaps fear should be classed with stealing because it seems to cause more trouble. And fear does steal from us. It robs us of our security, of our joy, of our ability to be present, to be creative. Fear can stop us from fully participating in almost every aspect of our lives. I love the simple acronym that fear stands for fuck everything and run, or face everything and recover. I heard another acronym for fear recently, future events already ruined, because fear is almost always about the future. It's a negative fantasy projection that pulls us out of the present moment and stops us from moving forward and causes us to use our energy to manage the fear rather than to participate in our life. So in this workshop, it was optional for people to share about their writing, but when it came to the session on examining our fears, it was stated in a bunch of different ways, but the primary fear for most people was the fear of being alone. Whether it was the fear of death, loss of loved ones, abandonment, fear of losing everything. When we looked deeply at it and boiled it down, it was the same fear of aloneness manifesting in all these different ways. And a really helpful way to look deeply at fear, and again, I'm using fear in the widest definition possible. It includes worry, anxiety, future tripping, procrastination, avoidance, defensiveness, depression, and isolation. Addictions and compulsions are almost always medicating fear. But how we look deeply at our fears is to start to make a list. What am I afraid of? What are my fears? Write it down. There's something that happens when we actually put pen to paper and write things down. For me, there's a whole different voice that comes out of my pen than comes out when I'm talking. I have access to aspects of myself when I write that my regular ego verbal self doesn't connect with. So writing the list. I'm afraid of the death of my children. I'm afraid of growing old. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of getting fired. And then we ask the deepening question, what's scary about that? Which will generally lead to another fear. I'm afraid of losing my job. What's scary about that? I won't be able to pay my bills. What's scary about that? I'll lose my home. What's scary about that? Then I'll be on the street. And what's scary about that? I'll be alone, unloved, and suffering. Now, everybody's list is different, but you might get the idea of looking deeply is to continue to ask that question, what's scary about this, until we get to the root. And when we get to the root of a problem and address the root, then all the other iterations of it dissolve. It's how I approach healing work, looking for the core issue. When we heal the core issue, all of the secondary dysfunctions are unnecessary because the core need has been met. So I don't need to medicate or distract myself anymore. I can get on with living. I was listening to a lecture by Krishnamurti, a great spiritual teacher from India. And he says, everyone is afraid to feel alone. He's so intense, this little man. It's stupid. We are never alone. We are part of the universe, connected to everything. If we can wake up and pay attention. And I have to say for myself, still often driven by the fear of being alone, that spiritual practice, shamanic journey work, connecting with nature, and really being mindful and in the present moment, he's right. I do feel that connection right now. The problem is I have trouble staying there, and I think most people do. But that's the work. And when I'm using my energy to be present and connected, That's the higher power. That's the love force of connection, of evolution, of creation. And when I'm reacting into that fear of being alone, I'm manipulating, I'm isolating, I'm withholding, defending, or withdrawing, or perhaps I'm even attacking. That's the lower power of fear driving me that generally is destructive and divisive and creates chaos. We do have a choice where we put our energy and if we're driven by fear or love. So another big fear, a primary one for many people, is the fear of being harmed, of being unsafe. That safety, stability, and comfort are primary. And this is rooted in our own survival. It's part of our limbic brain to avoid being harmed and killed. But in order to make progress, we generally have to go outside of our comfort zone. Resistance builds strength, and too much comfort tends to make us weak. There's a dynamic tension that we need to hold because life is always changing. And the fear of being harmed, whether that's emotional, physical, social, can really keep us contracted and closed. It's very connected with the fear of the unknown. But again, if we live deeply in the present moment, as openly and authentically as we can, each moment is creating our own reality. The choices we make now to stay in or go out, to take the new job or try something different, or to try to stay in the comfort of what we already know, that's the dynamic tension of those opposing forces. Taking risks has served me very well. In my experience, I have healed from many harms, and I no longer fear them in the way I once did. There's a fabulous book on child rearing called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee by Wendy Mogul. She takes a fabulous Jewish perspective through the lens of the Torah and the Talmud and the Jewish teachings of honor, respect, and the resilience that's built by facing and experiencing difficulties, and how protecting ourselves and our children from harm actually weakens them and creates fear because we don't have the experience of healing, transformation, and our own regenerative power that are often on the other side of being harmed. And the final big human fear, not the end of the list, it's kind of an endless list, but for our purposes here with the big three, is the fear of unworthiness, which is very tied to the fear of failure and being unloved. And I understand the experience of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in the very beginning of Genesis in the Bible as a mythic explanation of this essential human experience of separateness. And making sense of that separateness is that it's somehow our fault and we're unworthy, that we're separated from God because of our essential sinful or something's wrong with us nature. I've been listening to lectures by this very controversial teacher, Osho. He's all over YouTube. But he said something I've never heard before. He said, "We have separate bodies. Our minds overlap, but we share the same soul." And I think the fact that we have separate bodies is very confusing to us because there is a drawback toward that oneness. So I think on a soul level, that question of unworthiness probably exists in all of us. And I think it's part, again, of this dynamic driving tension toward growth and evolution. Now, certainly on a personal level, on a family or cultural level, being loved and accepted, being found worthy by our parents, by our teachers, by our bosses, is an intrinsic part of our culture. I've actually become quite annoyed with the education system where we are basically teaching our children to please another person so that they get a grade rather than to be creative and expressive within themselves. I was frequently an all A student, and so what? That's another discussion. So I heard that Salvador Dali, one of my favorite artists, studied at the Academia de San Fernando in Madrid, Spain. This is in the 1920s. And the lore goes that he went to his final examination and he said, None of you are worthy to judge me. And he walked out. It's an interesting thing to think about. Who is worthy to judge us? And are we worthy to judge others? And what does it mean to be worthy? In fact, what does it mean to be loved? Fear of unworthiness also looks like fear of judgment, of not being good enough, or what some people say is not being enough, period, which is like shame, the idea that there's just something wrong with us that can't be fixed. And that's a lie, because there's always room for progress. But fear of unworthiness often is rooted in perfectionism and a relentless inner criticism that can take 1,000 different forms. Being overly concerned with the approval of others and really fearing disapproval, not allowing ourselves to be human and make mistakes, which is often where we learn. And this fear of unworthiness can cause us to hide who we really are or cover up our imperfections or even our uniqueness. It can even push us to lie, cheat, and steal because we don't believe we can get things directly. I was a petty thief for many, many years, and the idea was that I was getting away with something, but I was actually reinforcing that I was unworthy of getting them directly, like everyone else. That I had to be dishonest to get my needs met, that the universe would not provide for me directly, that I had to steal from it to get what I needed and what I wanted. So although my issues with unworthiness have very little to do with the approval of others, in fact, one of the great gifts that my parents gave me was rather not giving a shit what anyone thinks, but my petty thievery, and also probably my serial relationships with married men and other people's boyfriends point to my own dysfunctional relationship with worth and unworthiness. Again, we can come back to this larger dynamic of, am I seeking what I can get from a place of fear, or am I looking to what I can bring from my love basket? And that perspectival or attitudinal shift moves me out of fear and into the flow of life. So I may have raised more questions than I answered, but I think that's a good thing. And I want to end with my favorite fear prayer. You may have heard it before. It's worth repeating. I say it on a regular basis. To whomever or whatever source you ask for help, please remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Transmuting the energy of fear into positive, constructive action. It's a powerful practice, and I hope that it's helpful for you. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to find out how spiritual psychology might be beneficial in your life or learn about my mentorship program, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. We can set up a free 30-minute discovery call. We're working on some free online workshops and spiritual practice groups, hoping to create some formats to build a supportive, authentic community. Doing a lot of Instagram lives these days. You can check me out at Renee LaValle McKenna on Instagram. And thanks as always to my supporters on Patreon. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.